Meet Lerato, a woman on the verge of marrying the love of her life, Thabo. But just hours before the wedding, everything changes when Lerato uncovers a shocking betrayal. Her best friend, Zinhle, is having an affair with her fiancé. Stay stunned because what happens next will leave you speechless. Will Lerato rebuild her life or stay trapped in the past? If it's your first time here, kindly subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on our next upload. Now let's dive into the full story. Lerato stood in front of the full-length mirror. Her reflection a perfect vision of beauty. The white gown draped gracefully over her body, its intricate lacework a testament to the meticulous care that had gone into every detail. The light of the setting sun filtered through the windows, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. Her heart should have been soaring, but it wasn't. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the delicate veil resting on her head. Her mind a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't shake. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was about to marry Thabo, the man she loved with all her heart, the man who had been her constant companion for years. And yet, despite the grandeur of the ceremony, the lavish setting, and the well-wishers gathered outside, something didn't feel right. The moment she had been waiting for, planning for. Her entire life was finally here. But a strange, gnawing feeling lingered in her chest. It was as if the calm before the storm was taking longer than it should. "Are you ready?" Zinhle's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Zinhle, her best friend since childhood, stood at the doorway, a smile on her face. But there was something about it, a tightness, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes, that made Lerato pause. Zinhle was always so full of energy, so sure of herself. But today something was different. Lerato turned to face her, offering a weak smile. "I don't know. I thought I would feel different. Happier, maybe." Zinhle walked into the room, closing the door behind her. She placed a hand on Lerato's shoulder, her touch gentle. "You're just nervous. It's normal. You've got this, girl." But Lerato didn't feel normal. The unease that had settled deep within her only grew as the minutes ticked by. Something was missing. Something she couldn't put her finger on. The buzz of the phone on the table next to her snapped her out of her thoughts. Without thinking, she picked it up. Text message from Thabo, or so it seemed. But as she read the words, her heart sank. It wasn't Thabo's message. It was from an unknown number. "Lerato, I'm sorry. I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to know. Zinhle and Thabo. They've been seeing each other. Please don't let them lie to you." Lerato's breath hitched, her pulse racing as she reread the message. Was this some kind of sick joke? Her mind couldn't process it. She felt like she was drowning in disbelief. She turned to Zinhle, who was still standing beside her. Zinhle's eyes flickered, a brief flash of panic. Lerato's voice trembled as she asked, "Zinhle, is this true?" Zinhle opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence hung between them, thick with tension, as Lerato's mind raced to connect the dots. It couldn't be. Not today. Not on the day of her wedding. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing against her chest, and all she could hear was the pounding of her heart. What had she missed? What had she overlooked? Lerato's hands shook as she stared at Zinhle, whose expression had shifted from confident to something else, something guarded. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Every second felt like an eternity as her mind raced through every moment with Thabo, every shared glance, every conversation, every promise made. Could it be true? Could Zinhle, her closest friend, betray her like this? Her best friend, the woman who had been by her side for every triumph and heartbreak. And Thabo, the man she was about to marry, the one she had trusted with her heart for years. "Zinhle," Lerato's voice cracked as she repeated her question, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is this true?" For a moment, Zinhle didn't answer. Her lips trembled, as if she were trying to form the right words, but the truth seemed too heavy to speak. Her gaze flitted nervously to the floor, then to the window, anywhere but at Lerato. It was as if she couldn't face her. "I don't know what to say, Lerato," Zinhle said softly, her voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. Lerato's heart thudded painfully in her chest, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The room spun and her legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the table for support, trying to steady herself. So it's true then. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Zinhle closed her eyes, as if bracing herself for the storm that was about to erupt. I never meant for this to happen. It wasn't planned. It's complicated. Lerato took a step back, her mind in a daze. Complicated. You've been seeing my fiancé behind my back and it's complicated. The words came out in a rush, raw with emotion, each one a jagged knife. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have ever imagined. I didn't want it to go this far, Lerato. I never wanted to hurt you. Zinhle's voice faltered as tears began to form in her eyes. Lerato took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Her chest was tight, her throat constricted with a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. But beneath it all, there was something else, a sharp, searing ache that cut to her core. The person she trusted most in the world had turned on her, and the man she was about to marry had betrayed her in the worst way possible. You're telling me this now? Lerato whispered, her voice trembling. On the day of my wedding, when everything is already in motion. Zinhle's face crumpled, and she reached out for Lerato's hand, but Lerato pulled away instinctively. Please, Lerato, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know what to do. I never thought you'd find out this way. Lerato shook her head, her emotions boiling over. How long has this been going on? She demanded, her voice rising. How many times have you and Thabo been sneaking around behind my back? Zinhle bit her lip, the guilt in her eyes unmistakable. It's been happening for a few months. But it wasn't like what you think. We didn't plan it. It just happened. Lerato's head spun. The room felt smaller, suffocating. You think that makes it better? That you didn't plan it? You've been lying to me for months, Zinhle. And Thabo has been lying to me for years. Her voice broke as she spoke his name, the realization of his betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. I never meant for it to hurt you, Zinhle whispered, her voice cracking. I never meant to come between you two. I know how much he means to you. Lerato closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. The wedding she had dreamed of for so long, the life she had imagined with Thabo, now felt like an illusion, a fantasy built on lies. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to confront Thabo and demand answers, but instead she just stood there, frozen in disbelief. The woman she had called her sister, the man she was about to marry, both had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Lerato took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. I need to be alone, Zinhle. Please. Just leave me. Zinhle didn't argue. She nodded slowly, her tears now freely flowing down her face. I'm so sorry, Lerato. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was too late. The damage was done. Zinhle left the room, and Lerato was left alone with her thoughts. Her wedding dress felt like a weight she couldn't bear. Her reflection in the mirror seemed like a stranger's. The woman who had stood there just hours before, filled with excitement and love, was now a broken version of herself. She looked at the clock on the wall. The ceremony was only an hour away. The guests were waiting. The vows were ready. But the truth weighed so heavily on her that it was impossible to ignore. What now? How could she walk down that aisle? How could she marry a man who had betrayed her? How could she face the people who were expecting to witness the happiest day of her life, when all she could feel was a gaping hole in her chest? The question lingered in the air like an unspeakable truth, one that had no answer. The storm was coming, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Lerato stood motionless in the room, her wedding dress still clinging to her body, now feeling like a suffocating shroud rather than the symbol of joy it was meant to represent. The ticking of the clock was deafening, each passing second pulling her deeper into the chaos of her thoughts. She glanced at the ornate mirror in front of her, her reflection now a stranger, no longer the radiant bride, but a woman on the verge of heartbreak. The door creaked open, and in walked Thabo, his presence as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. But today, he was a man she didn't recognize. He stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying her as if searching for something. His eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Lerato," he said softly, his voice a little shaky. "You look beautiful. It's almost time, love. The guests are waiting. Everything's ready." Lerato didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. How could she? Her mind raced, still reeling from the shocking revelation. The truth weighed heavy on her chest, and the pain of it all threatened to drown her. How could she look at him and pretend that everything was fine when she knew what she knew? I don't feel beautiful, Thabo," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." Thabo's eyes furrowed in confusion, his brow knitting together. "What do you mean?" "You're stunning, Lerato. You always are." Lerato turned slowly to face him, locking eyes with the man she had once believed to be her future. "Thabo," her voice quivered, the words coming out with a force that she hadn't expected. "I know about you and Zinhle." The blood drained from his face. The room seemed to tilt, the floor spinning beneath her feet. He swallowed hard, his lips pressing into a tight line, as if trying to hold something back, something he knew he couldn't hide any longer. "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about, Lerato," he said. His voice laced with a hint of panic, but there was no conviction in his words. Lerato felt a cold fury rise within her, and she clenched her fists at her sides. "Don't lie to me, Thabo. I saw the messages. I saw the truth. I know about the affair. Don't you dare try to deny it." Thabo took a step toward her, but Lerato took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please," he said, his voice low and pleading. "Lerato, I can explain. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It's not what you think. Not what I think." Lerato echoed, her voice rising. "I saw the messages, Thabo. I saw everything. How long has this been going on? How many times have you and Zinhle been sneaking behind my back? Was I just a fool to you? To both of you?" Thabo's face crumpled in guilt, and for a moment, it seemed like he was struggling to find the words. "It wasn't like that, I swear. I never wanted to hurt you. But Zinhle, she's been there for me when things were falling apart between us. I never meant for it to go this far, but it did." Lerato's chest tightened, the pain and anger rising in her like an uncontrollable tide. "You never meant for it to go this far. You're telling me you've been sleeping with my best friend behind my back, and that's your excuse?" She laughed bitterly, a hollow, dry sound. "You've ruined everything, Thabo. You've ruined me. This wedding, this life we were supposed to have together, it's all built on lies. I can't do this anymore." Thabo reached for her, his hand trembling as it hovered in the air between them. "Lerato, please don't say that. Please just listen to me. Love you. I've always loved you. I was confused, I made a mistake, but I want you. You're the one I want to spend my life with." Lerato recoiled, every part of her body rejecting him, rejecting his words. "No, Thabo. You don't get to say that now. Not after everything." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not now. Not when she needed to be strong. You don't get to come in here, tell me that you love me, and then expect me to just forget what you've done. I'm not your fool, Thabo." She paused, her voice shaking with a mixture of sorrow and fury. "I don't even know who you are anymore." The room seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the weight of betrayal, and she realized that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything: trust, loyalty, love. The foundation of everything she had built her life upon was crumbling before her eyes. "You need to leave, Thabo," she said, her voice firm now, her gaze never wavering from his. "Leave. Can't be with you. Not after this. I need to figure out what to do. I need to figure out who I am without you in my life." Thabo stood there, stunned, unable to speak as the reality of the situation sank in. Slowly, with a final glance at her, he turned and left the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and Lerato was left standing there, alone with her thoughts. She collapsed onto the chair by the window, the tears she had been holding back finally falling. Each drop was a release, a small part of the weight she had been carrying, but it wasn't enough. The wedding was still set to go on. The guests would be expecting her to walk down the aisle in mere minutes. But Lerato knew deep down that everything had changed. She had no idea what would come next, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. Lerato stood motionless in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The dress that had once seemed like the perfect symbol of her dreams now felt like an elaborate costume, one that only served to mask the devastation she felt inside. The delicate lace, the shimmering fabric, the intricate beadwork, they were all nothing more than a facade now. The life she had been preparing to step into, the future she had been so certain of, had been shattered in a matter of hours. The clock ticked louder than before, each second a reminder that she was supposed to be walking down the aisle, supposed to be exchanging vows with a man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with. But how could she do that now? How could she look at Thabo and say, "I do," when she knew the truth? How could she pretend that everything was normal? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Zinhle. "Lerato, please. I need to talk. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please let me explain." The message felt like a punch to the gut. Zinhle's apology meant nothing now. The betrayal was too deep, the hurt too raw. Lerato had been preparing to walk into a new chapter of her life, but now she wasn't sure what the next page looked like, or if she even wanted to turn it. She glanced at her phone, then at the door where her bridesmaids were waiting, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. They had been excited, chatting and laughing, preparing for the ceremony as if everything was perfect. The world was moving on as if nothing had changed, but for Lerato, everything had come to a screeching halt. A knock at the door pulled her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was her mother. "Lerato, darling, are you ready?" Her mother's voice called gently through the door. "It's time. The guests are all waiting. They'll be expecting you any minute." Lerato didn't know how to answer. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her breath was shallow. She hadn't told her mother about what had happened. How could she? How could she explain the truth in a way that wouldn't destroy her mother's joy for her? "I'm coming, Mom," Lerato called back, her voice barely above a whisper. But she wasn't coming. She couldn't come. Not like this. She looked back at her phone. Another message from Zinhle. This time it was more urgent. "Lerato, please. If you leave, it will ruin everything. Don't do this. We can fix it. Me explain. I'm begging you." She gripped her phone tightly, resisting the urge to reply. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done. Zinhle's words were empty, just as empty as Thabo's promises had been. Lerato felt the weight of the situation crashing down on her once again, the suffocating realization that everything she had believed in had been a lie. The door opened, and her mother stepped in, her face lighting up when she saw her daughter standing in her wedding dress. "You look so beautiful," her mother said, her voice filled with pride. "I can't believe the day is finally here. Thabo must be so lucky to have you, my beautiful girl." Lerato's throat tightened. She forced a smile, but it felt hollow, like a mask she had to wear to keep everyone around her from seeing the truth. How could she look her mother in the eye and pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't? How could she keep up the act? "Thank you, Mom," Lerato said softly, though the words barely left her lips. Her mother looked at her, her brow furrowing with concern. "Is something wrong, darling? You don't look like yourself. You should be excited. You've been dreaming of this day for so long." Lerato didn't know how to explain. How could she tell her mother that the man she had trusted had betrayed her? That the best friend she had shared her most intimate moments with had deceived her? The words felt stuck in her throat, too painful to speak. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a little nervous, that's all," she said, though the lie tasted bitter in her mouth. Her mother didn't seem convinced, but she smiled gently and nodded. "Well, there's no time for nerves now. Your day has come. Thabo is waiting for you. The guests are all gathered. This is your moment." Lerato nodded, trying to steady her breathing. But in that moment everything felt surreal. The idea of walking down the aisle, of exchanging vows with Thabo, felt impossible. She couldn't marry a man who had betrayed her, who had betrayed their friendship. And she couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Can we just take a moment? Lerato asked, her voice breaking. Her mother looked at her, her expression softening with concern. Course, darling. We can take as much time as you need. But you have to understand, the longer we wait, the more people will wonder where you are. Lerato nodded, her thoughts in turmoil. She couldn't do this. She couldn't go out there and pretend to be someone she wasn't. The woman in the wedding dress didn't exist anymore. The bride who had been so eager to marry Thabo was gone, replaced by someone who felt lost and broken. I'm not ready, Mom, she finally admitted, her voice a whisper. I don't think I can go through with it. Her mother's face softened, but there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes. What do you mean, darling? You're going to be fine. We've waited for this day. Thabo is a good man. He's the one you've chosen. The one you love. Lerato shook her head. I thought so, Mom. I really did. But now, I can't marry him. Not now. Not after everything. Her mother's face faltered as she took a step back. What are you talking about, Lerato? What's happened? Lerato took a deep breath, steeling herself for the words she had to say. Mom. Thabo and Zinhle. They've been having an affair. Behind my back. And I can't marry a man who's lied to me. Her mother's face drained of color. The shock on her face was immediate, and she took a step back, clearly stunned. What are you saying, Lerato? I'm saying I can't go through with it, Lerato replied, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. I'm not going to marry him. The room was silent, the weight of her decision settling in the air like a storm cloud. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. And for the first time that day, she felt the smallest shred of relief, even amidst the pain. The air in the room felt suffocating as Lerato's words hung heavy between her and her mother. Her mother stood frozen, trying to process the gravity of the revelation. Her gaze was distant, lost in disbelief, as if the world she had known for so long had crumbled beneath her feet. Lerato. Her mother began, her voice cracking. This can't be true. Thabo is a good man. We've known him for years. He's always been kind, respectful. Why would he do something like that? Lerato could see the confusion in her mother's eyes, the genuine struggle to accept what she had just heard. Her mother had always been the epitome of trust, the kind of woman who believed in love, loyalty, and the idea of marriage as an unbreakable bond. But Lerato had learned the hard way that those ideals weren't always enough to protect her heart. Mom, I saw them, Lerato said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. I saw Thabo with Zinhle. I caught them in a hotel room. Together. Her mother's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the words. You saw them. But how? When? Just an hour ago, Lerato whispered, her heart heavy with the memory. I was supposed to be getting ready for the ceremony, and I decided to stop by the venue to clear my head. But when I saw them, everything changed. It wasn't just an affair, Mom. It was a betrayal, something I can never undo. Her mother's face crumpled, her hands trembling as she reached for Lerato's arms, pulling her into a tight embrace. My darling, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine the pain you must be feeling right now. But you have to understand, sometimes people make mistakes. We all do things in moments of weakness. Maybe this isn't as bad as it seems. Lerato pulled back from the hug, shaking her head in disbelief. You don't understand, Mom. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Zinhle is my best friend, and Thabo. He's the man I was supposed to marry. They both betrayed me, and now my whole life feels like a lie. Her mother's eyes softened with sympathy, but there was a glimmer of something else. Guilt, perhaps. Lerato, you have to be sure of what you're saying. You've worked so hard for this day. You've spent years dreaming of this wedding, this life with Thabo. Are you sure you want to walk away from all of that? Lerato stared at her mother, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. I'm sure. I don't want to marry a man who doesn't respect me. I don't want to be with someone who could do something like this to me. I deserve better than this." Her mother hesitated, her eyes flickering with a mix of confusion and concern. "And Zinhle, she's your best friend. How do you even begin to forgive her for something like this?" Lerato's heart ached as she thought about Zinhle, the woman she had trusted, the one who had stood beside her during every heartbreak, every challenge, had turned into the very person she had feared. The betrayal cut deeper than the wound inflicted by Thabo, because Zinhle had been the one person she thought would never hurt her. "I don't know," Lerato admitted softly. "I don't know how to forgive her, or if I even can. Right now, it doesn't feel like there's anything left to forgive." Just as the silence between them thickened, Lerato's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Thabo. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, unsure of whether or not she was ready to speak to him. Her mother gave her a knowing look, silently urging her to answer. "You need to talk to him, Lerato. You need to hear his side of the story." Lerato swallowed hard, her stomach in knots as she pressed the answer button. "Lerato." Thabo's voice came through, shaky and hesitant. "Lerato, please listen to me. I need to explain. Everything that happened, what you saw with Zinhle, it's not what you think." Lerato's eyes burned with unshed tears, her breath shallow as she tried to keep her composure. "No, Thabo. I saw everything. I don't need an explanation. You've already made your choice, and it wasn't me." She could hear him sigh on the other end of the line, the weight of guilt in his voice. "I'm so sorry, Lerato. Please just let me explain. I made a huge mistake. Zinhle means nothing to me. It was a moment of weakness. I never wanted to hurt you. Love you. Please don't walk away from everything we've built." Lerato felt a surge of anger rising within her. How dare he say he loved her now, after everything he had done? How dare he try to justify his actions with empty words? "I don't want your apologies, Thabo," Lerato said, her voice cold, but her heart shattering with each word. "I don't want your love. You betrayed me. Both of you did. And that's something I can never forget. I can't marry you. Not now. Not after this." There was a long pause, the silence deafening. Then Thabo spoke again, his voice broken. "Please, Lerato. Don't do this. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll prove to you that I'm sorry. Just give me a chance." Lerato's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away, steeling herself. "You had your chance, Thabo. You had it and you threw it away. I won't be part of this. I can't be." She hung up the phone, her chest heaving with emotion. The woman who had been about to marry Thabo was gone. The life she had imagined for herself had been ripped away in an instant. Her mother stepped forward, her expression softening with empathy. "Lerato, I don't know what's next for you, but I'll be here no matter what. You're not alone." Lerato nodded, but her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, hurt, and betrayal. She had lost Thabo, she had lost Zinhle, and now she had to rebuild a life she never thought she would have to live. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, like the aftermath of a storm. The wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life had turned into a nightmare. And now, Lerato found herself struggling to navigate a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. She hadn't left her mother's house since the phone call with Thabo, retreating into the safety of her childhood home, surrounded by memories that felt both comforting and suffocating. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, calls, and notifications, but Lerato had no desire to respond. There was nothing anyone could say to fix what had happened. Thabo had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way, and Zinhle, the person she had trusted the most, had not only been the one to carry out the betrayal but had also kept it hidden from her for so long. The anger and the heartbreak had consumed her, leaving little space for anything else. She paced the living room, her mind racing. How could they both have done this to her? How had they gotten so comfortable, so careless with a person who had loved and trusted them both? The ache in her chest was constant, like a dull, throbbing pain that wouldn't let up. Her mother, who had been by her side through it all, remained silent for most of the day, giving her space to process. But by late afternoon, she couldn't hold back anymore. Sitting down beside Lerato, she placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Lerato, darling," her mother began softly, her voice filled with concern. "I know you're hurting right now, but you can't stay in this place forever. You have to confront what happened, and you need to make a decision. Do you want to keep running from this, or do you want to move forward?" Lerato met her mother's gaze, tears still fresh in her eyes. "How can I move forward, Mom? How? The life I thought I had, the future I thought I was going to have with Thabo, it's all gone now. Everything is destroyed." Her mother sighed, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "I know it feels that way. But you have to remember that your worth isn't tied to anyone else. Not Thabo, not Zinhle. What they've done to you doesn't define you, Lerato. You are so much more than this pain. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but this will pass. You will heal." Lerato's eyes softened, but the emptiness inside her felt overwhelming. She nodded faintly, but her mind was still clouded with confusion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive them, Mom. The thought of even seeing them again, it makes my stomach turn." Her mother gave her a reassuring squeeze. "Take it one step at a time. Focus on yourself, on healing. The rest will come when it's ready. But right now you need to give yourself permission to grieve. It's okay to feel everything you're feeling." Lerato leaned back into the couch, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't escape the images of Thabo and Zinhle together, the way they had looked at each other, the way her world had shattered in a split second. She had spent years building a life around Thabo, believing that he was the man she was meant to be with. And now all of that was gone. Zinhle, too, had been the one person she thought would always be by her side, the one person she thought she could rely on no matter what. To know that she had betrayed her in such a way, it was too much to bear. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from Zinhle. "Zinhle, Lerato, please. I know you must hate me right now, but I need you to understand something. It wasn't what you think. I made a huge mistake and I am so sorry. Please let's talk." Lerato stared at the message, the words stinging her heart. How could she possibly talk to Zinhle right now? How could she even think about forgiving her after everything that had happened? Her mother watched her closely, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to respond to her right now, darling. You don't owe her anything. But if you choose to, do it on your terms, not because she's asking for forgiveness. You need to heal first." Lerato remained silent, her thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment she considered replying, but she quickly discarded the thought. No words could undo the hurt. No apology could make it right. The room was heavy with tension, and as the evening wore on, Lerato felt a sense of exhaustion creep over her. She had spent the entire day rehashing the events in her mind, trying to make sense of it all, but the answers never seemed to come. The betrayal was too deep, too raw, and she couldn't find a way to move past it. Not yet. Her mother, sensing her exhaustion, stood up slowly and walked toward the kitchen. "I'm going to make us some tea. You should get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day, and you don't have to face all of this today." Lerato nodded, though her mind was far from peaceful. She had never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. She had always believed in love, in the idea that trust and loyalty were the foundation of any relationship. But now those ideals felt shattered like glass scattered on the floor. As the hours passed, the weight of the situation continued to press down on her. She knew that healing would take time. She had no choice but to take things one step at a time. But even so, the question lingered. Could she ever trust again? Her world had been torn apart, and she had no idea what the future would hold. Here ends part 1 of this story. Will you love to watch part 2? Then let's see in the comment section part 2. Again, don't forget to share with your loved ones. Thank you for watching.